COVID-19 is the first pandemic of the information age. People today can access high-quality information from a range of sources, meaning it has never been easier for members of the public to understand the risk a new viral threat could pose to themselves, their loved ones, and their communities. But many do not seek out or use readily available information. In the UK, for example, even at the height of the pandemic's first wave, almost 1/4 of the adult population were not accessing easy-to-find daily news about COVID-19. By the summer, that number rose to almost 1/2. Why is this? How do people decide what they want or need to know? Why do people seek, ignore, or even actively avoid certain information? How does information feed knowledge that can change behaviour? These questions have all been made more pertinent and urgent by the pandemic. These are also questions the life insurance industry needs to answer in order to help it sell protection more effectively. But before I start answering these questions, I want to ask you a question. Would you like to know if a colleague viewed you as incompetent? If I had that information and could share it with you, would you want to know? Okay, and now another question. What about the opposite? Would you like to know if a colleague viewed you as competent? I'm repeating a question asked in a recent study by Tali Sharratt, Professor of Cognitive Neuroscience at the University College London. In her study, just over half of the people wanted to know if colleagues see them as incompetent, but well over 3/4 want to know if colleagues see them as competent. Why do we see this difference? Knowing people think you are competent is nice, it shows you're on the right track, but how practically useful is it? You're unlikely to change your behaviour based on it. However, knowing that colleagues see you as incompetent is probably much more useful. You could lose your job if lots of colleagues think you are incompetent. This information allows you to change your behaviour and hopefully improve your prospects to potentially save your job. It seems so strange. Why would so many people avoid potentially useful knowledge? Behavioural scientists have long been interested in this question. A fundamental belief held by many is that acquiring more information and knowledge about oneself must be a positive. As Socrates said, to know thyself is the beginning of wisdom. One reason knowledge is seen as positive is the belief that it should surely lead people to change behaviours in ways that would help them achieve their goals. Being informed, or so the argument goes, is always better than not being informed. This belief appears particularly strong when it comes to health and financial well-being. For example, the idea that we will be healthier if we have access to more information about our habits, bodily functions, and biological metrics and predispositions has great intuitive appeal. It is what is driving the life insurance industry's current interest in wellness programs and wearable technologies. There is, however, plenty of evidence that people regularly avoid acquiring information about themselves, even when lack thereof appears to have real costs. For example, many investors tend to avoid looking at their financial portfolios when the stock market is down, and individuals at risk for certain health conditions often eschew medical tests, even when the test is free of charge. A well-timed article published in the January 2020 issue of Nature Human Behaviour provided an interesting framework of information-seeking concepts that goes some distance to explain why people seek the information that they do. In the article, entitled How People Decide What They Want to Know, Professor Sharratt, working with Professor Sunstein from Harvard Law School, explained that people spend a lot of their everyday lives deciding what information they want to seek. For example, what news article they want to read, what colleague or friend they want to seek advice from, what updates do they want to see on social media. To Sharratt and Sunstein, these decisions to seek information depend on a person's estimate of the overall impact of the information they choose to acquire on their well-being, an impact that manifests itself in 3 ways. First, information impacts action. It can change what people do. People generally want information that will help them make better decisions, which typically means decisions that provide rewards and avoid harm. They therefore judge every piece of information's instrumental utility, i.e., how valuable and useful the information item might be in guiding actions to a better outcome. For example, a medical test is likely to have high instrumental utility, as it may suggest whether having surgery is the right course of action. We could view this as the classically rational reason for seeking information, and so it's what people tend to focus on when thinking about how information might change behaviour, their own or that of another. But there is a second impact of information. People sometimes will want information not for any relevance to their actions, but rather for its effective, i.e. emotional, impact. People therefore judge the hedonic utility of new information items, how the new items might influence their psychological well-being, or more simply, whether they would feel better or worse. We see the impact of the hedonic utility calculation all the time. People tend to actively avoid useful information that might make them feel sad or bad. So often they will weigh themselves less frequently as they put on weight, or check their bank balances less frequently as they get into debt. People generally work out their own hedonic balance of knowledge and ignorance to optimise their moods. And there is a third impact. Information changes what and how people think. It has a cognitive impact. Everyone wants a better understanding of the world around them, and so often seek information that can enhance their ability to do so. But most people have their own existing ideas as to how the world works and prefer to seek information that supports and confirms these. This is known as confirmation bias. People therefore assess new information's cognitive utility, whether the information would require them to change or even rebuild their existing ideas, beliefs and values. For example, if solutions to tackling a particular issue might involve an increased role for government in individual behaviour, those who would object to such an increase would be likely to avoid exposure to information that might support more intrusive solutions. If we understand these three utility impacts of information, we can then start to understand how access to information may influence behaviour in counterintuitive ways. For example, it seems that the positive potential impact of restaurants disclosing the calorie content of their menu items in order to help diners make healthier food choices was overestimated. This may be because value and taste are more often the rewards diners seek rather than health or weight control. So rather than change behaviour, the calorie information often makes diners feel guilty about their choices. So rather than creating a nation of salad eaters, listing menu item calories may instead create a nation of unhappy hamburger eaters. There is an overall welfare loss. These three factors can also help us understand some COVID behaviours we are seeing. Getting a test for COVID-19, for example, or even just checking for its symptoms, might cause some people fear and anxiety. It has low hedonic utility. For others, legally enforced public health restrictions might conflict with their political and philosophical ideas about individual freedom and the role of government. There is low cognitive utility. I believe this information-seeking framework might also help us to understand the current and future impact of COVID-19 on life insurance sales. At the start of the pandemic, you may have seen some of the articles predicting that people would panic buy life insurance. Intuitively, this made a lot of sense. The attractiveness of life insurance is a function of how risky you feel life is, and for many, COVID changed this calculation rapidly. Furthermore, this is the first major health event such as this where people could easily go out and seek a quote and purchase life insurance in just a few minutes. Now, it would be an exaggeration to say that people were banging down the digital door to get life insurance at the start of the pandemic, but there are now some signs that life insurance sales have increased in some markets. It would seem that COVID-19 is having an impact. Why is that? Well, for some, it may be that this new risk information finally tips the balance in their calculation as to whether life insurance is a worthwhile purchase. But that might not explain why sales growth seems strongest in younger adults, given the COVID risk to them is so much lower than other existing risks. The economic case for these people to buy life insurance was already very strong before COVID-19. It seems likely that the emotional impact of COVID is also a key driver. COVID has made people fearful and anxious, often for the first time. They are already experiencing thoughts about death and loss, which means they are looking for comfort and reassurance, and life insurance can provide this in part. But will this increase be sustained? Will the pandemic lead to a sustained increase in life insurance sales? There are reasons to suggest yes in the short term, and even once, hopefully, vaccines have greatly reduced the COVID risk. The main reason is a mental shortcut we all commonly use called the availability heuristic. If something can be easily recalled or imagined by our brain, then it must be important. The more readily available a piece of information is, the more important it must be. And events with emotional resonance often remain available for longer. This is why when it comes to property and casualty insurance, we often see insurance sales spike after a major natural event such as flooding, even in parts of the country where the risk hasn't changed. We see stories all over the media of people losing their home, or even have friends and family members who have been affected, and suddenly the risk to ourselves is much more available. This suggests that the impact of COVID on sales may linger for a period of time after the pandemic ends. The memories will remain available to many people, even as the risk reduces. But history shows us that the rates of insurance decline again as memories fade. Gradually, the emotional power of the COVID memory will probably fade, even if very real other non-COVID risks remain. So the need for greater life insurance protection across society will remain, but this current driver of purchases may reduce. I will conclude by saying this. We must remember we are in the sprout selling business. Life insurance is good for you. You know it's good for you. But like sprouts, it just doesn't taste very nice. By not tasting very nice, I mean you are sacrificing immediate pleasure for long-term gain, but also that the process of thinking about life insurance often has low hedonic utility. The process of thinking about life insurance forces people to face their own mortality and its potential impact on their families. This generally brings forth emotions of loss and grief. We can't change this, it's a consequence of the very nature of the product. Life insurance sales have increased since the pandemic, partly because COVID-19 has sparked for some an anxiety response, and purchasing life insurance may have reduced that anxiety. When we are already anxious or fearful, like during the pandemic, then life insurance does taste nice. It can help to relieve these negative emotions that are front of mind. But at some point, the pandemic and the anxiety it is eliciting will pass. In more normal times, people won't have these emotions, so won't proactively go looking for a solution. But the strong economic rationale for buying life insurance will remain. The multitude of risks that existed before will still exist. COVID-19 could lay the foundations for a longer-term resurgence in life insurance sales, but the old adage that life insurance is sold, not bought, will still apply. We will still have to sell life insurance. If not, then just as calorie counts on menus create sadder hamburger eaters, COVID will have created more anxious but still unprotected families. We all have a role to play in building a stronger and more resilient world post this pandemic. Part of our role will be to help ensure more families are protected.